The sitting is open. I thought that you were applauding me entering the room, but it was for somebody else. But anyway, thank you for being here with us and having the opportunity to watch how this assembly is working. Dear colleagues, I remind you that you should insert your badge before taking the floor. As you begin your speech, please press the microphone button once only. The first item of business this afternoon is the debate on the report titled Preventing and Combating Violence and Discrimination Against Lesbian, Bisexual and Queer Women in Europe. It is document 16043, presented by Mrs. Beatriz Fresco-Rolfo on behalf of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. In order to finish by 5:15 p.m., I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 5:10 p.m. to allow time for the reply and the vote. I call now Mrs. Fresco-Rolfo, rapporteur. You know that you have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes for your reply to the debate. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, the promotion of the respect of all in their full diversity is a principle which we vehemently defend in this Assembly. Many colleagues have risen up as time has gone by over all forms of injustice, discrimination, and stigmatization. In spite of remarkable progress it's made in protection of rights, LGBTI persons are still victims of violence and discrimination in Europe today. Lesbophobic violence is still a very serious problem which affects many people throughout the world, making the situation cause for even more serious concern. This phenomenon is expressed by acts of hatred, discrimination, and very often by physical and psychological violence. Lesbian, bisexual, and queer women today are the subject of attacks that are trying to make them invisible or even deny their legitimacy in the public domain. They are attacked as women and because of their sexual orientation. Today, I have the honor to present you a report which deals as objectively as possible with violence and obstacles that LGBTQ women may come up against and which prevents them from feeling safe in our societies. Obviously, it is because of an intersectional and inclusive approach that protection of rights can be carried out effectively, and that's what this report attempts to do. I do, however, wish to point out that in spite of a significant uptick in lesbophobia and crimes and infractions, I have had a difficult time dealing with this subject because often data on this type of violence is not available. I want to, however, share with you my first thoughts. First of all, that much of this violence comes from the wish to punish because those women do not have a sexual orientation which is considered to be consistent with heterosexual standards, or rather because they fought off the advances of a man. And to be more precise here, dear colleagues, I'm talking about collective rapes or even murders by an ex-spouse. Then there are violence coming from a family that does not accept sexual orientation and which no longer acts as a protector, pushing rather teenagers and young adults to leave their homes and find themselves in the street. LGBTQ women are often forced to hide their homosexuality or the visibility of their sexual orientation so as not to have to deal with threats and hate speech. Avoidance strategies or self-erasure often occurs. Victims are often the subject of a feeling of social isolation, stigmatization, and have ongoing fear of affirming themselves and freely living their identities. Harassment and insults, including online, continue to be frequent for public figures. Just a few days ago, our colleague Lucia Plavakovo was the subject of hate speech following a session in her national parliament from another member of parliament because she's queer. Threats proffered to her and her daughter, you can only imagine what that was like. And that's because she doesn't fit into a neat little box. Let us hope that she will obtain justice. These forms of stigmatization can also be encountered in the world of sport, and in spite of certain lambophobic comments that were made during the Paris 2024 Olympic Games, there were also a possibility to shine greater light on LGBTQ athletes who were recognized for their exceptional performance. Attempts to intimidate, to emotionally harsh, even the term lesbian is often associated with shame and disgust. Let us be realistic. The scope of insults and threats which are made explicit in the long term are devastating for self-esteem, for mental health, and for the well-being of the women concerned. difficulty in accessing employment because of discrimination linked to sexual orientation or the absence of support in the workplace constitute a serious economic problem for many lesbian women who are trying to integrate into their society. This can lead to homelessness, which disproportionately affects LGBTI communities. Medically speaking, 60% of LBQ women do not get pap smears, which can put off the discovery of a disease, and 90% have not had chlamydia testing because of their sexual orientation. The associations I met with wanted to denounce a misogynist and heteronormative health system, which causes this community to suffer from non-diagnosis and from a lack of health care. A late diagnosis represents danger, let me remind you. Institutionally speaking, the fact for some countries not including equal marriage in their legislation or not recognizing the marriage effects of same-sex couples married abroad bring about family instability, parental discrimination, and daily administrative difficulties. Before I conclude, I would like to point out that this report essentially concerns violence against LBQ women, and in spite of several attempts of intimidation by an association, I refuse to include transphobic comments in this report. I want to reiterate that transgender women are, quite simply, women. This report wants to make the voice of LBQ women heard, contribute to the visibility of their fight for equal rights, and to act in such a way that the difficulties they deal with may be eliminated in an effective fashion. It is crucial to promote consciousness-raising programs on equal rights so as to take apart negative stereotypes and encourage better comprehension and understanding between different communities within a given society. It is essential to fight against lesbophobia at all levels of our society so as to create an environment where everyone, whatever their sexual orientation may be, can live in safety and with dignity. Collective mobilization and a will for change are of basic importance if we want to build a world which is more inclusive and more fair. It's only by strengthening laws against hate crimes as well as legal protection for LGBTQ plus persons as a whole that our current societies, and it is presently 2024, will finally be able to promote and make concrete this idea of living together in all forms of diversity, to make progress and to act in such a way that everyone has the possibility to live in a stable way in their families if they wish to do so. And to conclude, I should like to thank the Secretariat of the Committee for all of its help and support.
Thank you, Beatrice. In the debate, I call first on behalf of the European Conservatives, Sally Ann Hart.
Every individual should be treated with dignity and respect. It's sadly true that lesbian, bisexual and queer women face discrimination and violence in both private and public spheres. And while we must ensure that no one is subject to hatred or violence based on their identity, we must also carefully consider the broader implications of the policies being proposed and the role of education in shaping the next generation. It's undeniable that LGB women face significant challenges. Sexism, misogyny, stigma continue to affect their lives, from access to employment and housing to healthcare and personal safety. These are real issues that deserve attention and serious solutions. However, as we seek to address these concerns, we must also ensure that our responses do not go too far in ways that undermine the rights and protections of others, particularly when it comes to education. One of the proposals we often hear is the introduction of educational programs that teach about gender diversity and sexual orientation in schools. While well-intentioned, these programs risk confusing young minds, especially when they encourage children to question their gender identities prematurely. Schools should focus on the basics, math, science, literacy, not the promotion of ideologies that are still highly contested. Parents, not educators or bureaucrats, should be the primary guides when it comes to teaching children about complex issues of identity and sexuality. This does not mean turning a blind eye to discrimination, but it does mean acknowledging that there are alternative approaches that respect parental rights and the innocence of childhood. Instead of introducing controversial gender ideologies into the classroom, we can focus on teaching values that we all agree on: respect for others, the importance of equality, and the rejection of violence and bullying in all its forms. We can create environments that are inclusive and safe without pushing young people into ideological frameworks that may not align with their families' values. Moreover, it's crucial that we maintain the protections and rights that are essential for all women, particularly in spaces like women's shelters, sports and private spaces where privacy and safety concerns are paramount. We should not sacrifice the hard-won gains of women's rights in the name of inclusivity. Biological differences between men and women are real. A lesbian does not have a penis, and policies should reflect these realities to ensure fairness and security for everyone. There are alternative approaches that can address the concerns of LGBTQ women while safeguarding the rights of others. We can strengthen anti-discrimination laws, ensuring no one faces unjust treatment based on their sexual orientation or gender identity, without introducing policies that conflict with women's rights or parental responsibilities. We must take a balanced approach and not forget that different approaches can address the needs of all citizens in a way that unites rather than divides society.
Thank you, Salian. On behalf of ALDE, Damien Cotier.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, President. And on behalf of the ALDE Group, I'd like to congratulate and thank the rapporteur regarding her work, and it's a reason for stressing that lesbian, bisexual, queer women continue to suffer from discrimination because of their sexual orientation, gender, and other intersectoral factors, notwithstanding the obvious progress and major progress which has been made with respect to promoting the rights of LGBTI people in recent years on our continent. This discrimination affects their access to jobs, housing, healthcare, and in particular, that discrimination has to be combated. The rapporteur is right firmly to condemn movements and actions to deny or withdraw the rights of LGBTQ women and, more generally, LGBTQ women. Those movements try to erase their presence from the public space, and the resolution is particularly right in stressing that laws which are so-called anti-propaganda laws should be repealed when in fact they seek to discredit another form of normality, which may not be majority normality, but it's nonetheless normality. It's not about promoting ideologies, as we've just heard, but simply recalling that there are other forms of normality, and that's especially important for young people. The rapporteur is also right in calling for zero tolerance regarding crimes and hate speech against LGBTQ people and women in particular. And she's right to call for legal protection, which is specific, and equality of rights. And there's a whole arsenal of measures which our states can take here. Several parliaments, in particular, have made progress in this direction, with prohibition of so-called conversion therapies, which are basically unacceptable treatments in countries such as our own, or indeed in any country. And it's therefore important to ban them and ensure they're dealt with. The rapporteur is also right in calling for recognition of parental rights for same-sex couples. There are various ways this can be done. Many countries recognize those rights. Others still have some way to go in this field. Sometimes it means recognition of marriage for all, sometimes a civil partnership, sometimes other forms, but progress must be made to that end. The report also stresses the importance of national strategies for protecting the rights of LGBTI people. And here again, we share that vision. Our countries should equip themselves with such instruments. And then fair access to healthcare for LGBTQ people is an especially important measure. And by way of conclusion, the rapporteur also stresses the importance of enhancing the visibility of lesbian women. Let us hope it's going to be not necessary one day to have to stress this, but it's particularly important for young people to know that there are these other forms of normality, and society should be integrating and loving all its children. And with that in mind, we support this resolution and again commend the rapporteur.
The European Left. Thank you, Damien. On behalf of the United European Left, Laura Costello.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, the rapporteur, because the report underscores the vulnerability of LGBTQ women to anti-gender movements and the need for inclusive policies and legal protections. Rightly so, due to alarming trends worldwide. Furthermore, the varying societal attitudes towards gender identity and sexual orientation in different countries are also a cause for concern. While some regions have made significant progress in recognizing gender identity, others remain highly restrictive regarding sexual orientation. This highlights the ongoing struggle to challenge traditional societal norms and promote inclusivity. While progress has been made, there is still much work to be done to ensure the safety and equality of LGBTQ women in Europe and worldwide. It is essential to continue advocating for comprehensive legal protections, promoting education and awareness, and challenging discriminatory attitudes. The proposals set out in this report for concrete actions to protect LGBTQ women from violence and discrimination are very comprehensive and are a good starting point. By promoting the report and building up on this work in our national parliaments, we can come closer to building more inclusive and just societies. That being said, I briefly would like to touch upon the very question of gender categorization, which arises from a complex interplay of biological, societal, historical, and institutional factors. I think it is important to know that while some individuals may feel that gender is an innate, internal experience, others perceive it as a social construct that has been shaped over time by cultural norms, expectations, and power structures. To guarantee that the rights mentioned in this report are upheld, on many occasions, gender categorization should take place. I think a broad reflection is needed about the purposes of gender categorization and the possible misuse of this practice. There are concerns about the potential for gender categorization to infringe on individuals' privacy and lead to discrimination. Therefore, it's important to ensure that data is collected and used ethically and responsibly. While there are valid reasons for maintaining gender categories in certain contexts, it is also important to recognize the limitation and potential for harm. As societies continue to evolve, it is likely that discussions about gender identity and expression will become increasingly complex, and that the Parliamentary Assembly will need more nuance in its reports. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Rapporteur.
Thank you, Laura. On behalf of the Socialist Democrats and the Greens, Heike Engelhardt.
Thank you, Mr. President, cher Kollege. Jetzt könnte ich provokant fragen, braucht es denn wirklich?
So we could have a provocative question asking women, a report that only deals with the rights of LGBT women. With the Istanbul Convention, don't we have a framework that has protected the rights of all women independently of their sexual orientation? Fresco's report shows very clearly, yes, we do need this. She has in great detail worked out how particularly endangered this group of women is. And I want to thank you, dear colleague, that you have brought this report to the Assembly. Imagine, ladies and gentlemen, you can't share with your close environment that you're in love because you're afraid that you're going to be the subject of violence, perhaps even raped or murdered. You have to lie to yourself about yourself. Imagine that in the public you have to deal with matters with considerable reserve because if people discover your relationships, you may be physically wounded. Imagine that you can't tell your family your news. If you want to be a real family, you're not going to be able to share things because people say there's not really a man, so you're not having a real family because of a lack of husband. Or imagine that you have to deal with a very complicated adoption procedure, which may or may not work if you want to have children. So you're going to have to go on, in any case, explaining and fighting and explaining and fighting. So the exclusion of queer women, if compared to cis heterosexual women, you can, unfortunately, is something we have to realize is a daily reality. And then we look at the emotional and physical consequences of this as well. It is our duty to be able to protect these women and to do so in a legal framework. When you look at the anti-gender polemics that we are putting forward, especially by extreme right parties, I have to say clearly here that the rights of queer women are not a niche opportunity. We have to be able to guarantee this in law, and from a democratic and human rights perspective, this is all of our duty. We cannot let hate take over the stage. We cannot allow society to be divided and groups to be played off against one another. Rather, we have to deal with one another. The needs of queer women have always been underestimated and have not been talked about enough. As we see, there's much to be done here, and I and my group agree with the report for all of these reasons. Thank you.
Now I give the floor to Giorgos Stamatis on behalf of the EPP Group. George.
Then, allow me to speak in my native language. Κυρίες και κύριοι συνάδελφοι, δεν θα μπορούσε, πιστεύω, να υπάρχει καλύτερη...
Ladies and gentlemen, Beatrice, I think, is really the best possible rapporteur for this subject, and I really want to thank her for everything she's done, both the work here and in the committee. What is the issue in this report? It really does describe us where we want to go and what the purposes we wish to attain are. And that means a society which, does it mean a society which takes us back to the Middle Ages, when people were split into categories like rich and poor? By adopting this resolution, we can take major decisions to protect LGBTQ women and give them a choice as to what life they wish to lead. And I totally agree with Beatrice that it's very difficult to get everything we want today. And it would be very positive if all citizens, including those being discriminated against, could come here to Strasbourg and report on and describe what they are experiencing. Obviously, we need to give LGBTQ women more rights. They should be able to adopt children, decide on their lives, and be self-reliant and not be subjected to racism, homophobia, lesbophobia, and similar discrimination. And today, at the very time when we're holding this debate, there are several lesbian women belonging to another discriminated against group, Roma lesbian women, immigrant lesbian women. So you can see that there is proliferating discrimination, and this report gives us hope we're heading to a better future. So I would beseech you to support this resolution. I really think many women are suffering today, and other categories who expect us to make a real step forward.
Now, we continue to our list with Luz Martinez Seiso.
Gracias, presidentes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to speak Spanish, if you don't mind. In spite of the great progress we've made in protecting lesbian, gay, and trans and intersexual people in the last year, there are people who want to deny or withdraw those rights in Europe. For much time, lesbian, bi, trans women were marginalized, and today they are specifically attacked by anti-gender movements who attack women's rights and rights of LGBT people, attempting to denounce them or to deny them their legitimate right to exist in public space. LGBT women are stigmatized and discriminated against on the basis of their gender, their sexual orientation, and their specific identities. since they don't fit into any of the little box of social expectations or gender roles that have been stereotyped or standards of being feminine. They're subject to physical, mental, and verbal violence and to honor crimes who people want to punish them for using their bodies as they wish or playing the roles that they play. These stigmas can also affect their access to employment, social reproductive rights, health care, and housing, and also the right to have a family. Preventing and fighting against discrimination and violence against LGBT women is an issue of human rights. In Spain, female couples have gotten the right to have access to assisted procreation techniques which were not brought by the previous Popular Party government. And now our ley is making it possible for organizations to make LGBT associations to be incorporated into the right to have children and equal marriage couples with two women. So women, lesbian women, have to take into account intersectionality and multiple forms of discrimination because they are greatly vulnerabilized by the fact that they are subject to different forms of discrimination, both for their gender and their sexual orientation. In many cases, this can be further worsened when others, like ethnic and racial factors or handicap, can also be discriminated against. The rights of these people being trampled for political reasons and hate speech is directed against them. This is a clear symptom of the falling back that we're seeing against the right and the extreme right. The fight against hate speech in the Congress of Deputies in Spain is showing clearly how important it is to see the extent of these rights, the areas in which they unfold, and how groups do this, and to take the necessary measures to find a social, political, and legal response to these phenomena. For this reason, it is necessary for members of parliament to play an active role in fighting against hate speech directed against those same people, and in particular in such a vulnerable sector as LGBT women. I would also like to thank you for the work that's been organized by the rapporteur, and also thank you for the colleague who has brought this report to the Assembly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luz. Christophe Bricco is next.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais également remercier Béatrice Fresco-Loro.
I'd like to thank you very much indeed, the rapporteur, for her report and for her unstinting commitment for dignity and equality, and we can certainly see this in the national parliament as well. The issue that we are addressing today is all about this. It's about tolerance and dignity. In a report published in last May, the European Agency for Fundamental Rights, the FRA, and this is a report that it produces every 5 years on equality and dignity of LGBT persons. Well, this flagged up a paradox. European societies are much more tolerant, but at the same time, assaults, discrimination, acts of hatred and homophobic acts are on the rise. It sounds like a paradox, but it is. With regard to LGBTQ women, they're suffering on two fronts because homophobia is often accompanied with sexism. The first one is an aggravating circumstance of the second. I think, therefore, it's important that in this particular forum, which defends dignity and tolerance and gender equality and non-discrimination, we should support and defend these people. And I think the proposals made in this report are perfectly reasonable, and that we should all endorse them. Thank you very much indeed.
Merci, Christophe. Kate Osborne is next. Kate, we cannot hear you. Have you inserted your badge?
Thank you. Dear colleagues, Mr. President, I welcome this report in its entirety. It is well written and balanced and covers a whole range of ways LGBTQ women are sidelined, targeted and face a whole range of discrimination. 40 years ago, I came out as a lesbian, and now as a member of the UK Parliament, the gayest parliament in the world, I still face lesbophobia from some quarters, and particularly over the last few years, targeted by anti-gender movements. It's beyond disappointing that despite major progress from our LGBTI communities, in recent years we have seen frequent attacks on LBQ women, on our right to exist, and attempts to roll back the rights we have fought so hard for. I'm pleased the report asks Member States to celebrate International Lesbian Visibility Day. Last year, we held a debate in the UK Parliament on Lesbian Visibility Day, the first in the UK. Following that debate, I faced some awful homophobic remarks simply for being open about my sexuality. I was called a nonce, had serious threats, and received a barrage of abuse. This abuse is designed to silence women. We must instead use our platforms to call it out and to highlight, as this report does very well, the increase in sexism and misogyny that LBQ women face. Let me also be very clear. The intersectional approach of this report is exactly what is needed. As a cis lesbian woman, I refuse to be pitted against my trans siblings. We must not be distracted by the fabricated conflict between trans women and lesbians, which only serves to divide and undermine the fight for equality within our communities. We must also not fall prey to the false narrative portraying trans people as a threat to women. The vile abuse and terminology currently being used against the trans community is the same hate as the lesbian and gay community faced back in the 1980s. I welcome the report calling on Member States to ensure LBQ women have the rights and protections they need and deserve, and I'm pleased that the report talks about how LBQ women are portrayed and our diverse profiles. We are here to be fabulous in our differences and to be seen, to let others know that they can be their true selves. It's important that we don't forget the challenges that lesbians still face. So I would like to thank the rapporteur, and I hope that you all support the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. It is the turn of Yuri Kamelchuk, but I don't see him in the room. Yuri? No. So, it looks like, Francesco, you are going to speak earlier. Francesco Verducci.
Presidente, grazie.
President, thank you very much, colleagues. A lot of women suffer from violence and discrimination, not merely because they are women, but doubly because they are both women and lesbians. And the mere fact that they want to live according to their nature and their feelings alongside everyone else means that they have to hide away. This is a pervasive form of discrimination which is based in prejudice and stigma and which prevents them from living and being happy, and that is their most powerful and revolutionary right. And it's important that we extend civil rights and extend them to social rights, because the lives, daily lives we have are such that we are duty bound to be free from intolerance, and we have to combat crimes and abuses. And this is something that we have to do in this parliamentary chamber. And we've all seen girls or women who are harassed or are subject to offences because they are lesbian or queer. And the fact that we don't have the laws for them to be able to defend themselves and to assert their rights means that it's indispensable we make sure that we remedy this in all our legislation, because we have an aggravating factor of homophobia or hate crimes based on sex or gender, sexual orientation or gender identity. But I think that younger generations are far ahead of politics, and someday this battle will be won. And at the same time, we have to look at a most insidious form of discrimination, which is a government that refuses to register the births of children who are the sons or daughters of same-sex couples, of two women, and that is to violate the rights of those minors. I would like to thank the rapporteur. These are situations which concern us all, because this is a mark of unjust discrimination which hangs over the heads of millions of persons, and this discrimination can destroy lives as well as undermine democracies, and each and every one of us here in this assembly of the Council of Europe are duty bound to put an end to this state of affairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. And now it is Laszlo Toroskai.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before we discuss the situation of lesbian, bisexual and queer women in Europe, let's talk about something else related to this topic. Let's talk about the scandal that is currently unfolding here in the Council of Europe. I will share my views soon on the report entitled Preventing and Combating Violence and Discrimination Against Lesbian, Bisexual and Queer Women in Europe, because I have read this report. But first, let me tell you that I believed that the Council of Europe was actually about core values as it is proclaimed everywhere. That it is about human rights, about the protection of Europe's ethnic minorities, such as the Hungarian minority in Transcarpathia and Transylvania, and about the protection of the most vulnerable group in society, the children. But no, that's not what the Council of Europe is about right now. Children's rights are barely dealt with. Instead, we focus almost every session on LGBTQ lobby issues, just as this report is about the interest of a group of the certain sexual orientation. However, the biggest scandal is what the Council of Europe is doing now. In the Council of Europe's Agora building, there is currently an exhibition promoting sexual perversion with illustration of children and animals. It's a shame. As for the report, it mentions a few isolated cases from France, Portugal, Italy, but this is not a problem for the whole of societies in Europe. So the report's conclusions is therefore incorrect in this sense. The report highlights that it wants zero tolerance of hate speech, so-called hate speech, against the LGBTQ community. This is in fact a restriction on the freedom of speech, and it has already been implemented. It's in fact about censorship. You want to silence those who, in defense of the children, dare to criticize this lobby, which is getting stronger and more violent. Actually, it is not lesbian, bisexual, queer women who are at risk in Europe, but children. Among other things, because of the propaganda that has now been presented in an exhibition here at the Council of Europe. This exhibition, this is a pornographic, pedophile and zoophile exhibition. It's a scandal, and I demand that not freedom of speech, but such exhibitions should be banned. Thank you very much. It's shame on you.
Dear colleagues, it is freedom of speech that we have to enjoy here. And let me remind you, dear colleague, that it is hundreds of reports about children, about those who are in need, and weak people who are living in our member states. So I didn't interrupt you, but I would like you to reconsider the word scandal. I think it is a totally different meaning that we give, unless my English are not as good as yours. So let's go on. Jose Maria Sanchez Garcia. Jose Maria Sanchez Garcia. He's not here. Martin, he's not here. Do you want to take his place? No. Okay, let's go on. Gotske Gotskian.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, the fight against homophobia and transphobia has led to many advancements. Particularly, instruments like the Istanbul Convention are essential to ensure that everyone feels safe and feels that they belong in society, especially concerning the prevention of and fight against every form of violence. However, this struggle has no end, and fighting in just one aspect is never enough. Discrimination persists, access to social and economic rights remains problematic, and physical and psychological violence continue unabated. Moreover, each generation witnesses the renewal of hate speech fueled by phobic rhetoric and misinformation. Civil society that defends rights of the LGBTQ is being targeted. LGBT people cannot access even their most basic fundamental rights. Young people who are rejected by their families are unable to exercise their right to shelter. They cannot find jobs and sometimes cannot even vote due to misleading information on their identities. Simply expressing who they are to their loved ones becomes one of the most risky moments of their lives. Many are forced to hide their identities throughout their lives. When they are murdered, it is their friends who must even fight for the data to be publicly recorded. Those who use family values as an excuse to violate human rights do not make an effort to ensure that families can live together happily and in dignity. Discrimination against women intertwines with cruelty towards animals, just as violence against children overlaps with that against the LGBT community and refugees. As violence against LGBTQ women increases, it is increasingly hidden and ignored. As long as states do not publish credible data, violence remains concealed. Those who employ hateful rhetoric can then assert that violence is exaggerated. Today, on one side, there are those who defend democracy and human rights as a whole, and on the other, those strengthen their authority through a politics of hate to marginalize the vulnerable. The question here is, can we truly protect progressive texts like the Istanbul Convention? If we allow the authority of our councils, human rights instruments, to lose its power today, what other fundamental principles might be compromised tomorrow? Thank you.
Thank you, Gökçe. Gergely Arato is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to make it clear that I deeply disagree with my fellow MP, Mr. Toroczkai said, and I am convinced that does not reflect the opinion of the majority of the Hungarian people either. But if this unfortunate speech has already been made, it is just the right time to talk about the responsibility of the politicians. Because words do have consequences. In every case, we find that if minority groups are stigmatized for political purposes, this emboldens those who can only confront society's problem in the language of violence. This happened in Hungary as well, when the number of the reported attacks against LGBTQ people increased after the government and the far right put the fight against the so-called gender propaganda and LGBTQ lobby on its banner. But there are such news from Georgia, Romania, and other member states too. If rhetoric against a minority becomes a political weapon, it is always a green signal for violence. Of course, I respect that someone has a different opinion on any moral or political issue due to religious or personal beliefs. And I believe that the reasonable and calm discussion are more beneficial for all concerned. But there is a very clear limit. Respect for human dignity. The stigmatization, shaming, dehumanization, and exclusion of others are not only contrary to the basic ethical standard, including Christian ethics, but also pose a direct and strong threat to the social harmony and peace. Yes, hateful words are important, and the traders of hate have responsibility. That is why I would like to thank the rapporteur for this report, which draws attention to the situation of a particularly vulnerable group, LGBTQ women, and the violence they face. Because Democrats also have a responsibility. We must speak up and say no to hate.
Alessandra Maiorino is next.
Chair, I will speak in my own language, Italian. Voglio esprimere.
First of all, I should like to convey my heartfelt thanks to the rapporteur, Ms. Fresco Rolfo, for this very thorough report, as well as the very in-depth investigations that she's carried out, including in my own country, Italy, because LGBT people, unfortunately, are still subject to far too much discrimination in the member countries of this assembly, and particularly women, lesbian women, bisexual women, and queer women. At the same time, LGBTQ people have greater difficulties asserting their own identities and making themselves visible. Now, fortunately, of course, things are now starting to change, but the kind of discrimination these women face remains unchanged in many, many member states of the Council of Europe, which simply don't have legislation to protect LGBTQ people from discrimination. That is the case in Italy. We don't have a law that people can use to defend themselves on hate and discrimination which is based on sex, gender, or sexual identity. And in many countries, same-sex couples are unable to get married. In Italy, for example, I'll just take the case of my own country. It is a specific case, an unusual case. It is geographically a country which is incontrovertibly part of Western Europe, but when it comes to human rights and the LGBT community, and particularly for queer, bisexual, and lesbian women, it really doesn't resemble other countries in the same geographical area, because there is no such thing as same-sex marriage. They can only access civil partnerships, which is actually discriminatory. And that applies to heterosexual couples as well, because if they want to protect themselves or their children, then they're forced to get married, and they have no access to civil partnerships. And when it comes to children, in Italy, we, I'm very sorry to say, have seen many mothers simply removed from the birth certificates of their own children. I mean, just 33 in one city, in Padua. And so alongside that, there's a resolution calling for the banning of so-called gender theory in schools. But what you should remember is that our children, of course, need sex education. I mean, unfortunately, they have access to all other forms of much more dangerous information. And so that is why we really should do more to improve the condition of LGBT women. Thank you very much indeed for the report once again.
Wanda Nowicka is the last speaker in my list. Wanda.
Yes. Mr. President, the situation of LGBTQI people, despite significant success in many more progressive societies, still is far from satisfactory. Inequality and discrimination, quite often accompanied by numerous forms of violence, constitutes a serious problem in enjoying fully democratic, fair and just policies and standards. Moreover, growing populism and religious fundamentalisms block the necessary processes leading to full recognition of human rights, including autonomy, dignity, and self-determination of LGBT persons. Political instability often leads to challenging and withdrawal of laws and entitlements once adopted, and feeds the feeling of insecurity and uncertainty about the future. LGBTQ women are particularly vulnerable to these challenges and risks. While in the Polish context, the situation is quite difficult, especially in the realm of choosing the model of life, including the family life, it affects particularly women. Poland is one of few European countries where neither same-sex couples nor civil unions are legally recognized. Despite the political will of the current ruling coalition to legalize civil unions, due to lack of majority votes, the law on civil unions could not be yet adopted. As far as reproductive choices are concerned, single women, including lesbians, cannot legally undergo in vitro fertilization. Those lesbian couples who choose this way to get pregnant have to go abroad for treatment. The right to maternity of lesbian couples is significantly limited, which has negative impact on the legal status of children of same-sex couples. Once the baby is born in Poland or abroad, the Polish law and practice does not recognize these children as legally born from lesbian parents. These children often are being denied the ID number. There are, though, some legal initiatives prepared by the current government aimed at the improvement of the status of and human rights of LGBTQI persons. The Ministry of Justice is working on the issue to guarantee children of same-sex couples legal status in accordance with the EU Court of Justice decision. Nevertheless, it is still not clear if and when they are going to be adopted. In conclusion, I have to state that there is still a long way to go before LGBTQI persons are able to enjoy equality and human rights globally, my country included. Please support the excellent report, to which I thank the rapporteur. Thank you.
And that concludes the list of speakers. So I call now Madame Fresco-Rolfo to reply. You have 3 minutes, Beatrice.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Well, it was quite a calm debate. It was one that was constructive, apart from one colleague who spewed his hatred within this hemicycle. I'd like to thank you, President, for what you said afterwards, calming things down. Now, I've heard a number of comments about the fact that not everyone necessarily agrees with everything, but I think the debate has been very constructive. That's the most important thing of all. With regard to inclusive education, which is covered in this report, it's not a means of propaganda. It's a means of enabling all children to understand and to perhaps accept sexual orientation of other people. The aim is not to promote a given sexual orientation. The aim is simply to explain and make people understand that we can all live together and accept differences. I very much appreciated what Dame Muti said when he said society is here to love all its children, all its adults. And I think this is a key principle here that's set out in this report. Regardless of our orientation, regardless of our sexual orientation, society is here to defend everyone's rights and to promote living together. We talked about intersectional discrimination for women, for lesbians, for disabled people, for people subject to racism. Can you imagine the sort of stigmatization that you are subject to if you are subject to this intersectional discrimination on 4 different fronts? You need to fight to develop more tolerant societies, despite the rise in acts of hatred, because societies are, as I said, more tolerant. People are living openly, and this despite a rhetoric which wants to impose restrictions on society, whereas living together has never been a problem or difficulty. The rights of children, well, I mentioned them in my report because this is ever so important. Of course, you can have heterosexual parents, homosexual parents, but the rights of children are hugely important. We need to protect them, enable them to live with both parents. and there need to be legislative advances made on this front. We need to continue to work on this. With regard to responsibility, well, yes, words have consequences. If we look at violent words and the consequences they have, I don't want women to have to deny their sexuality. I want them to fully experience and live their sexuality in this world. Thank you very much indeed.
Does the chairperson of the committee wish to speak? Maria Mezentseva, you have the floor.
Thank you, dear President. Colleagues, very sad to say, sometimes persons are discriminated for the fact that they love some particular person, and the others would judge are they allowed or not to love this particular person. But that goes way more deeper in the societal relations than that. I want to thank, on behalf of our committee, to Madam Beatrice Fresco-Roll for her work, for the conducted hearings, for the collected information, and the fact that we didn't have any amendments and the resolution was adopted unanimously proves that the work was conducted so efficiently. It is the first time, colleagues, that our Assembly debates on the report dealing specifically with the situation of LGBTQ women in Europe. It is also an opportunity to show what political stance we may take, what is the call for action, and which support programs can be given. Due to the fact that too often it is the attention to silence the voices of LGBTQ women, to invisibilize them so that they, for instance, don't exist in the society, and just to put them aside. LGBTQ women are true political and effective actors. They're citizens, they're parents, they're business leaders, they're workers, and we can name it. However, their rights and interests are not often reflected in the policies nor of our member states or other partner countries. The rights of LGBTI persons are many times neglected, and this must change. Colleagues, LGBTQ women are attacked for who they are and what philosophy of life they represent. They are exposed to violence in person and online, physically and verbal violence, and this may go on and on. This report calls for an equality of rights and for an end to all forms of the discrimination of violence against LGBTQ women. It highlights specific difficulties and challenges, and the resolution presents in its final text the measures which can be tackled, which can tackle prejudice, discrimination, and violence. Of course, the systems which we have passing the laws in the Parliament, changes for the court system, of course, would help. Regardless, however, how many reports we can pass, it should be directly implemented by the governments and member states. And President, to conclude, we must say that we must demonstrate our support to LGBTQ women and to all LGBTI persons in general. We're in favor of this text, and I'm sure it will receive vast majority. I thank the Secretariat of our committee, and I thank all members who have shown up for this vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The debate is closed. Dear colleagues, the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination has presented a draft resolution, document 16043, to which no amendments have been tabled. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution. A simple majority is required. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft resolution is adopted. The next item of business this afternoon is the debate on the report by Mr. Furat Benchikha, titled Protecting the Human Rights and Improving the Lives of Sex Workers and Victims of Sexual Exploitation. The document is under the number 16044. Chair of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination is Mrs. Maria Mezentseva-Fedorenko. Maria, I know that it is very quick, but you have the floor now on the report that I have just referred. You have 7 minutes, as you know.
I think I'll extend the words of appreciation to the committee, and I will explain the main points of the resolution, and I will initiate the call to the Bureau and what we have decided in the committee after the discussions in the political groups. Dear President, dear colleagues, I would like to say a few words about the resolution that we have revised in Paris, and it was adopted a few weeks ago by a large majority, the text itself. And the report and the draft resolution were the outcome of the excellent reports of the Margaret de Boer, a human rights lawyer with the vast experience in matters related to migration, and Furat Benchikha, who is no longer a member of our of the PACE, but we thank him for his work. He has just left our embassy to serve, and he was serving as General Rapporteur on the rights of the LGBTI people, and until recently the Rapporteur on combating racism and intolerance. Both rapporteurs conducted some very good work encompassing research, exchanges of experts, and they've conducted fact-finding missions to the member states. Above all, they involved the preparation of these reports in a large number of civil society organizations. I would like to name them: Amnesty International, La Strada, the European Sex Workers' Rights Alliance, Médecins du Monde, Doctors of the World, the Coalition of the Abolition of Prostitutions were invited to participate in our hearings in Paris. The European Women's Lobby, the Amicale du NEET, Isala, and others, they were consulted directly by us and Secretariat, and the rapporteur took part in the meetings. Also, we had members of the governments, police officers, the representatives of academia, and they also provided very valuable information. As usually, the members of the committee contributed to the text. They shared their views. But most importantly, they also registered amendments. The approach of the committee was based on human rights, particularly the Council of Europe standards, such as those mentioned in the Istanbul Convention, the Council of Europe Convention on Actions Against Trafficking in Human Beings, the European Convention on Human Rights, and the case law of the Strasbourg Court, European Court of Human Rights. Persons selling sex and particularly vulnerable are particularly vulnerable to discrimination, violence, and exploitation. Many of them are victims of trafficking, indeed trafficking for purposes of sexual exploitation is rife, and women and girls are disproportionately affected. Colleagues, countering discrimination based on any ground is our committee's mission, and that is our committee aimed to with the text that is approved. The aim was to raise awareness of this severe discrimination that people selling sex face, which is often ignored, underestimated, or even hidden. Also, our aim was to provide concrete indicators to the member states, so which extra measures can be taken. It appears that there is no enough political support, as the consultations were conducted in all political groups from Monday to today onwards. And now we have opinions that are extremely divided. We have no intention to divide the Assembly, and we are very constructive. You know that our committee always brings people along and together. Therefore, right now, I would ask the Assembly to refer the report back to the committee according to rules and the procedures, back to a Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination for additional discussion, work and deliberation. On the point of information, I would like to inform colleagues from other committees that we would address the Bureau, the meeting of which will be held tomorrow, to receive an extension of 6 months to possibly have another rapporteur, another work being conducted, and probably finally a report for the Assembly to be considered. We hope this recommendation and suggestion of the Lined Committee will be approved. Thank you very much, dear President.
Thank you, Maria. Dear colleagues, as it was just announced by the chair of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, Ms. Maria Mazantseva-Fedorenko, she wishes to propose that the report be referred back to the committee. On this motion, one speaker is in favor and one against, and they can heard, of course, equally. Ms. Mazantseva had already spoken in favor. Does anyone wish to oppose this motion? No? Now we are going to vote. The Assembly is going to vote, and I remind you that we are voting for motion document 16044 back to the committee. Those in favor of referring the report back to the committee should vote yes. Those against should vote no. I repeat, those in favor of referring the report back to the committee, as Mrs. Mazantseva has just proposed, should vote yes. Those against should vote no. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. So, the motion has been agreed and the report is therefore referred back to the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. Dear colleagues, the next item of business this afternoon is the debate on the report titled Guaranteeing the Human Right to Food, document 16041, by Mr. Simon Mutken, presented by Mrs. Aurora Floridia on behalf of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development. In order to finish on time, we should finish by 8, but since the just discussed item is being referred back to the committee, I believe that we will finish much earlier. I will interrupt the list of speakers earlier to allow time for the reply and the vote. Now, until Mrs. Floridia takes her chair, so, Madame Floridia, are you ready? Okay, you know that you have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end to reply to the debate. When you're ready, you can take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, I have the honor of presenting to the Parliamentary Assembly
a report devoted entirely to the right to food, which is one of the cornerstones of the concept of sustainable development. I would like to begin by congratulating the rapporteur and former president of our committee, Mr. Motkan, on his inspiration for this subject and his dedication to bringing it to a successful conclusion. I wish to start with some key figures. 2.3 billion people, or 29.6% of the global population, were food insecure in 2023. 1 in 4 people did not have access to safe drinking water at home. By 2030, billions will still lack regular access to clean water. Obesity has a similar economic impact to smoking or armed conflict, costing around 1.75 trillion or 2.8% of global GDP. This report stems from a paradoxical reality in Europe. Despite an abundance of food resources, hunger and malnutrition persist, revealing deep inequalities in access to healthy and sufficient food. These inequalities are exacerbated by climate disruptions, which worsen agricultural crises and weaken supply chains, posing serious challenges to ensuring equitable access to food and water in the future. Food-related issues in Europe are complex. The lack of effective self-production systems and imbalances in food distribution and marketing chains harm small producers who are deprived of fair remuneration. Market-driven logic dominant in Europe prioritizes economic interests over individuals' right to food, reducing people to their economic potential rather than recognizing them as holders of fundamental rights. In preparing this report, our committee organized extensive consultation with recognized experts addressing issues of food democracy, food insecurity, and the food economy. A notable innovation was the inclusion of a group of young people from disadvantaged neighborhoods in the process. This group, involved in an educational project on food resilience, provided valuable insights and concrete proposals. Early today, they animated a lively smoothie distribution with their mobile kitchen, raising awareness on the fight against food waste and reinforcing social connection that food creates. Their participation highlighted the importance of understanding the social and political barriers to healthy eating and focusing on a human rights-based approach aligned with the values of the Council of Europe. Consequently, the rapporteur proposed modifying the report's title to focus on guaranteeing the human right to food. And since I'm talking about these young ambassadors, and I think they are in gallery today, or where are you? Okay. Yes, I would like to join the rapporteur in sincerely thanking them, thanking you for your participation and encouraging you to continue your action with the energy you have shown in our joint work. The right to food is a fundamental right recognized in the national law, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The United Nations Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights clarified in 1999 the obligation resulting from this right for states to protect population from hunger and to respect and realize the right to food. For over 20 years, the United Nations has developed tools to clarify and implement the right to food. The Assembly can thus emphasize the importance of the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization voluntary guidelines, which guide states in integrating the human right to food into constitutions, legislation, and food policies. Additionally, the conceptual and strategic framework developed by the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition promotes a systemic vision of food systems aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. In Europe, the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine have reignited the debate on food sovereignty and food insecurity. In Europe, the problem lies in food accessibility rather than availability. The consequences of food insecurity are severe, particularly in terms of health. Unhealthy diets are the leading cause of death in Europe, responsible for diseases such as cardiovascular illnesses and diabetes, with an economic cost comparable to that of smoking. Despite international progress, none of the Council of Europe's member states' constitution explicitly recognize an autonomous right to food. Existing legislation, while protective of food safety standards and consumer rights, does not guarantee universal access to sufficient food. Moreover, current measures to combat food insecurity, such as the redistribution of food surpluses, are more reactive to emergencies than focuses on dignity. Therefore, the Assembly should recommend that member states include the right to food in their constitutions, adopt framework laws consistent with this right, and shift from a charitable approach to a right-based approach in fighting food insecurity. The Council of Europe has made efforts to improve food security in Europe, started with the 1995 partial agreement. Despite recommendations to create a European Framework Convention and an agency dedicated to food security, these initiatives failed to be implemented. In the 1990s, the European Union took the lead, and in 2007, the Council of Europe ceased its activities in this area. Unfortunately, today, food issues are absent from the final declaration of the 2023 Reykjavik Summit. However, I am convinced with the rapporteur that there is a real opportunity for the Council of Europe to reaffirm its role as leader in human rights protection by developing a robust framework for the right to food. The right to food is independent with the right to a healthy environment and should hence be included in the strategy of the Council of Europe on environment aimed at being adopted in 2025. Thank you.
Vous avez votre carte? Tu lis ça.
Voilà. Oui. Excusez-moi, petit problème technique.
I do apologise, there was a slight technical problem there. Thank you very much indeed to the rapporteur. We now move on to the general debate, and I would remind you, speaking time is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. I now call Ms. Laura Castell on behalf of the UEL Group for 3 minutes.
I would like to thank the rapporteur, it's not here, but anyway, for such an important report. While supporting its proposals, I would like to highlight some challenges. Addressing hunger and malnutrition requires a strategy that focuses on human rights and government accountability. We agree with the rapporteur that anchoring the right to nutritious food and access to drinking water in our national constitution is a logical goal to pursue. However, this report leaves out the elephant in the room, that is the role of multinational corporations in the capture of our nutrition policy space and the human rights agenda to make them serve their interests, profit over public health goals. Since mid-70s, the world shifted away from rights-based governments to a dominant policymaking paradigm characterized by free trade, deregulation, globalization, and reduced government spending. And here we are in 2024 amidst a globalized corporate-led industrial food system which leaves us a few steps away from a disruption to the global supply chain. In the current system, citizens pay the price. Fragile supply chains, disparate distribution, workers without rights, climate crisis, diminished biodiversity, reduced access to healthy food, unsustainable diets, food loss, food waste, and extreme economic inequality. With hunger and malnutrition on the rise, it is time for a radical course correction and address the real problem of unequal access that requires political solutions. The current food supply management and production practices the current food supply management and production practices are insufficient to support the projected global population of 9.9 billion by the year 2050. Moreover, experts predict that at current rates of erosion due to the negative impacts of agri-food technologies, we will run out of farmable soil within the next 60 years. The excessive use of chemicals in agriculture is degrading our topsoil and making our food less healthy. The latest danger lies in the attempts by multinational corporations to gain control of global food governance from the rights-based intergovernmental system. We, as legislators, need to put human rights central and resist the influence of unaccountable multinational corporations in policy making in relation to food. Reforming the global industrial food system is difficult, but crucial. A human rights approach should empower food producers, especially small family farmers, who produce a significant proportion of the world's food and reach consumers through local markets rather than global supply chains. Their rights to land should be ensured. We need more state funding to guarantee food sovereignty. Any country, while part of a global food supply chain, should be able to sustain itself, to avoid famine or a new Holodomor in case of disruption of the global supply chains. The potential, and I'm finishing, of regenerative agriculture is huge. So now it's up to the governments and parliaments to be on the right side of the history and make wise choices which will define what is put on the plates of our children and grandchildren. Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the rapporteur.
Merci.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Castel. I now give the floor to Ms. Saskia Kloot on behalf of the Socialists.
Thank you, President. So we talk about a wonderful report about the right to food. I am so happy. I'm also happy. I'm going to wave to you like the Make Sense guys. I will tell a little bit more about you in a minute. Since I have only one kidney left, I am unable to eat healthy if I buy my food in a general supermarket. And that goes for a lot of people because we don't have healthy food on average in our supermarkets anymore. And I'm not the only one. A lot of people who have little money know about food but still be not nutritious and still have lack of vitamins and lack of minerals. So a healthy right to healthy food is a very important right, and I'm happy that we have this report. If you talk about payable food, I'm very happy that Makes Sense experimented a whole year long about how to get into a community who doesn't have a lot of money, but how to make healthy food for everybody. And you did really a great job, and I hope that Makes Sense will continue working on this topic. So be good to the next generation of food ambassadors, guys. I'm also happy that it includes the right to water, because the pollution of water is going on in many scales and many places of the world. Even in my home country, we are now discussing whether we will have drinkable water in the near distance. And it should therefore be a constitutional right to have clean and healthy water and clean and healthy food. And also not only for our generation, but also for the generation that comes after us. We also need to have an agricultural system that is good for our farmers here and now, but is also good for our farmers in the future and the far future. It has to be good for us as consumers now, but it also has to be good for our children and grandchildren because they also want healthy and good food. This means that the distribution must become fairer and it must become more sustainable. And we need to pay attention to hiccups or big hiccups like what happened in Ukraine. We need to be prepared for situations of war so our farmers know how to deal with disruptions of the food supply. That doesn't mean we need to go do more planning. We need to do more preparation. It doesn't necessarily means that we need to make more food. It needs to be smarter food. To conclude, we have to leave our current approach on food behind. If you don't have enough money to buy your food, you are getting a charitative approach. You get help from a food bank in my country, for example, but in many places in Europe, that is not the right way to treat a fundamental right as a right to food. We need to go to a rights-based approach where normal, healthy and safe food is the norm. Thank you, President.
Merci. Nous passons maintenant.
Thank you very much. And we now move on to the EPP group and Mr. Stamatis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I speak in Greek language. Κύριοι συνάδελφοι, μιλάμε για δημοκρατία.
We are talking about democracy and we're talking about peace. But if there's no food, then there can be neither democracy nor peace. And I think that this report, and I would have liked to thank the rapporteur who is no longer here, is one which, once it has been adopted, we would hope would go to all parliaments for all governments to adopt. Greece will start a procedure to reform the constitution, and I very much hope, therefore, that the right to food will be something that is debated in our parliaments, because we've got people in all our countries who are homeless, who have to queue up at food banks or soup kitchens day in, day out, and that's not good for any of our countries, for Europe, or for democracy. It is simply unacceptable that at this point in time, when we have renewable energy and we have a green transition, that we do not have the right to food. We've got both large and small food producers, and food must be accessible. It is intolerable that the major industrialists and the big supermarket chains have food in abundance that is not distributed, that is not shared out, and that is not a success for Europe. What separates us from the days of yore, from past times, is that we have a Europe in which we assert those rights, and I hope that this report marks the day in which we move into the modern age, because we've seen the effect of war on cereals, and we know that wars in the future will be all about water and the right to food, so they're not only decisive, crucial for human life, but also to enable all of us to live in the kinds of democracies which we espouse, along with the rule of law. So once again, I'd like to congratulate Simon, and we very much hope that this report is successful, and that once again this report will be debated in all of our parliaments to make sure that all countries of the Council will realise that there cannot be life or democracy or even human beings without food.
Olena Komenko.
Thank you very much indeed. I now call Ms. Olena Komenko on behalf of the EC Group.
The world faces growing threats to food supply chains driven by conflict and geopolitical instability, not just climate change. Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine has pushed 70 million people around the world to the brink of starvation due to disruptions in food supply chains. Russia keeps using famine as a weapon to achieve geopolitical goals around the world. Food security goes beyond access to healthy food in peaceful times. It involves ensuring resilient supply chains during crisis. Thus, it would be relevant to cover this challenge in the report. Moreover, the report could have been enriched with the valuable insights by paying a visit to key regions like Ukraine, which are directly impacted by food supply disruptions.
I would also like to stress that in 2015, the UN General Assembly adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals, one of which, Goal 2, directly addresses food security and threats, end hunger, achieve food security, improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. I very much hope that the food security issue will be given adequate consideration in a separate resolution in this Assembly. I very much hope that food security issue will be the focus in this Assembly, and such resolution should focus on preventing the weaponization of food supply chains, securing trade routes, and building a resilient global food system that can withstand geopolitical and environmental shocks. We need a stronger international framework to protect food security in conflict-prone areas as we consider enshrining the right to food in constitutions. This Assembly must prioritize a comprehensive approach to global food security, recognizing the threats posed by conflict and instability, and strengthen international cooperation to mitigate these risks. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Merci, Madame. Maintenant...
Thank you very much indeed. And now it's the turn of Larissa Bilouzé on behalf of the ALDE Group.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Dear colleagues, I would like to thank the author of this report, Mr. Simon Mutkai, that he's not today with us, but also our reporter, Aurora Floridia, for addressing such a critical issue, guaranteeing the human right to food. And I would like to express my unwavering support for the idea of enshrining the right to food in national legislations. While we have laws about food safety and trade in our countries, we are missing fundamental guarantees that access to food and drinking water is a human right. An enshrined right to food would do something simple but very powerful. It would require our government to ensure that no one should go hungry and that we must protect the most basic human rights. Ukraine knows about the importance of this right very well. As the bread basket of Europe, a vital producer and exporter of grain and meat, especially to the regions already vulnerable to food insecurity, such as Middle East, and Africa, but Ukraine's agriculture sector has been devastated by the constant Russian attacks. Every day, the ports of Odessa, of Ismail are bombed, attacked with drones. We need additional air defense system in Odessa region to protect our Black Sea. As in July 2023, Russia withdrew from the Black Sea Grain Initiative and began to actively destroy the infrastructure of Ukrainian ports. Despite this, Ukraine has launched a grain corridor across the Black Sea by pushing back Russian fleet in the west part of the Black Sea. We fully renewed our sea exports with the help of naval drones and with the help of you, friends, destroying one-third of Black Sea Russian fleet, and proved that Russia understands not the power of negotiations, but the power of weapons. It is important to ensure that sustainable food security in times of crises during armed conflicts is kept to. And it has been agreed with the committee that this problem should be reviewed in a special separate resolution because this issue cannot be delayed. When it comes to food security, Black Sea, Middle East, Gaza, Nagorno-Karabakh blockades are examples of how one can weaponize the food, keeping people hostages in complete shortage of access to food. Should we let this happen? No. We must also support the development of appropriate legal mechanisms, invest in technologies, sustainable innovations, and we need to ensure the development of resilient food systems capable to addressing global food security challenges. Thank you.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much indeed. And now, following on from speakers on behalf of political groups, we move on to the speakers list, the first of which is Ms. Estrela from Portugal. You have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Colleagues, first of all, I'd like to thank the rapporteur, Simon Mutkan, for his excellent report. I'd like to thank him for all the work that he's carried out within our Assembly. Thank you ever so much, Simon. Thank you for everything that you have done to promote the environment, to promote human rights, and to promote the rule of law. We're going to miss you. Colleagues, the right to healthy food, including the right to have access to drinking water, should become a cornerstone of European constitutions. Today, the rights to health, to education, and to housing are acknowledged in most countries in Europe, but there is no constitutional text which explicitly enshrines the right to healthy eating. This represents a major shortcoming, which is all the more glaring in a society where there is an abundance of food, which at the same time exists with hunger and malnutrition. Despite the agricultural wealth of Europe and the industrialization of its food systems, countless people, even within the most prosperous countries, don't have access to a sufficient, healthy, and nutritious food. Economic and food insecurity and the poor quality of certain industrialized foods are compounding social inequalities. At the same time, the consequences of malnutrition are felt not only with regard to individual health, but also are being felt by the public health systems, as these are generating huge costs. Our Assembly, as a promoter of human rights, should urge Member States to move from a charity-based approach to a rights-based approach. This is what we expect from democratic societies. This would enable not only for there to be universal access to quality food, but also to promote sustainable agricultural and food systems which respect the environment and future generations. By recognizing this fundamental right, we will be building a Europe which is a fairer Europe and where no one will be suffering from hunger or malnutrition. Thank you very much indeed.
Merci, Madame Estrela.
Thank you very much, Ms. Estrela. I now call Mr. Essel from Austria.
Ja, meine sehr
Ladies and gentlemen, there is a basic need for food. We people quite simply need food in order to survive, and that's why we have to do our utmost to make sure that every one of us has enough food. The right to food, therefore, is a basic human right, and pursuant to Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, is one that has been ratified by all member states of the Council of Europe, and this right covers a basic right to protection against hunger and a duty on states to ensure that food is available and accessible, sustainable and appropriate for all. Now, this ought to be patently obvious. We've seen situations such as that portrayed by our Ukrainian colleague. The war there has had a global knock-on effect on food supply chains. So it should be noted that, as a rule, access to food can only be guaranteed if enough food is actually produced and made available in sufficient quantities. Equally, food is not simply a freely available resource that can be distributed. Rather, it has to be grown, harvested, processed, and distributed. And the production process, of course, involves costs. There's an awful lot of labor and work that goes into producing food. Therefore, food has to be sold at a reasonable price, because if farmers produce food for the market, then of course their living costs have to be covered, and people who work the land and farmers have to be properly compensated for their work, because farmers live from food production. That is their livelihood, and therefore they need to be properly rewarded. They don't need more and more red tape and regulations, as currently the case. That is why the upshot of all of that is that many farmers are simply stopping producing food. They simply cease production. And to my way of thinking, that is precisely the point. If we have guaranteed access to food, then that means you have to ensure that sufficient food is available. Consequently, it is essential that we call on member states to boost those sustainable farmers and to protect them and ensure that we have food security and independence in all countries in order to guarantee food security, in order to make sure that enough food is available for all. Thank you.
Well done. Merci. C'est au tour maintenant de...
Thank you very much. And now the floor goes to Mr. Bouyx from France.
No? Voilà. Okay, we've managed to do it. Sorry about that, President. Sorry for this slight problem. I'm afraid we've been struggling with new technologies here. President, thank you, Madam Rapporteur. Dear colleagues, I'd like to take the floor with regard to this report on the human right to food. And we want I come from a region where food is ever so important, from the land and also human rights, which underpin our institution, I think are very much directly related to the right to food. This report asks whether food is a subject of a right. Well, I'm not quite sure, but it's certainly a human right. It's a fundamental human right, in fact. As the report reminds us, in 1996, at the World Food Summit held in Rome, 100 heads of state and government acknowledged in the Declaration on World Food Security, and let me quote, the right for every human to have access to a healthy and nutritious food in accordance with the right to adequate food and the fundamental right of each and every person to not have to suffer from hunger. Since 1996, with regard to the particular question of quantity, we have a question of quality, which has an impact on the environment and health. I'd like also to underline the importance of the agricultural side of things. I come from a country, France, and the territory of Calvados, where farming is of huge importance in the collective conscience. Agriculture and farmers provide food for the population. They need to be able to live from what they are doing, and the right to food needs to be done at this particular cost, of course. The health crisis related to COVID-19, however, and the war that's currently taking place on the doors of Europe, and the heightening of the problems related to the climate crisis mean that we need to consolidate the food sovereignty in Europe. And this needs to be seen as one of the strategic priorities in our public policies. And it's almost a key part of human rights, this. The French Parliament in 2024 voted on this particular issue, but I'm aware of the fact that this is what we need to continue to address. And now I was talking about what happens upstream. Let's talk about downstream. The ability of the population to access sufficient and quality foods let's talk about having access in the 21st century in Europe. Now, this may sound crazy that we're talking about this now, but of course, my dear colleagues, we're not suffering from the widespread famine, but poverty has not been completely eradicated, and of course having a huge impact on the quantity and quality of food consumed by the most precarious people. The report underlines the issue of junk food, which is often something that concerns the most marginalized, most vulnerable people. I'd like to end by adding that I'm very sensitive to the recommendation 8.1, which states to address the issue of food as an autonomous right, which is independent of the right to a healthy environment, by including in the Council's Europe's new strategy on the environment, which was announced in 2024, based on the final declaration of the Summit of Heads of State and Government held in Reykjavik. So I will be voting in favour of this resolution. Thank you very much indeed.
Merci, Monsieur Bouyx.
Thank you, Mr. Bouyx. Now called Valérie Pécard from Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much indeed, President, dear colleagues. I'd like to start by thanking our former colleague, Simon Moutkin, for such an important job of work on this report on guaranteeing the human right to food. This report, I think, shines a light on the paradox that, despite there being an abundance of food, hunger and malnutrition persist in Europe. We need to ensure access to healthy food. The report shows that a third of the people in France struggle to afford enough fresh food and vegetables. And this kind of food precarity shows the effects of junk food on health, because unhealthy food is responsible for many diseases such as cardiovascular diseases, cancer and diabetes, which account for 85% of mortality and 75% of morbidities in Europe. Now, for people to be able to eat healthily, of course, they need the financial wherewithal, but at the same time, they need enough knowledge on the subject. It is absolutely essential that children and young people have access to healthy food, and to do so, they need training and awareness raising. Actually, in Switzerland, many schools give cookery classes as well as nutrition lessons as part of the curriculum. And the benefit of that is to raise children's awareness of the importance of balanced diets from a very young age. Not only are they taught the principles of healthy eating, but they're also empowered to become autonomous in what they eat, and they can choose sustainable products, seasonal products as well, because obviously they need to realize that food is more than just ready meals. It is striking to see that none of our constitutions recognize a standalone right to food. This report recommends that the Council of Europe turn its attention once again to this issue, including the right to drinking water, which runs the risk of becoming increasingly problematic in future. I'd also invite European countries to put in place nutrition education. It's also important to look at the image of our country, Switzerland, which is perceived as being a rich country, actually has many people who queue up for food when food is distributed by charitable organizations. There are a number of major challenges relating to food in Europe. Often, access and supply is compromised by distribution and processing systems and very imbalanced markets which penalize the smaller producers. That is why, colleagues, I invite you to support the report and spare no effort in making our food systems more sustainable and inclusive. Thank you very much indeed for listening. Thank you very much, Valérie. We now move on to Mr. Kamelchuk from Ukraine.
Dear Chairman, dear colleagues, the right to food is a fundamental human right recognized by many international treaties and conventions. However, millions of people around the world continue to suffer from hunger, malnutrition, and lack of access to safe and nutritious food. This is not just an economic or social problem. It is a challenge to our collective efforts to ensure human dignity and equal opportunities for all. Paradoxically, even in Europe, where food is abundant, hunger and malnutrition persist, demonstrating inequalities in access to healthy food. The situation is exacerbated by climate change, and distribution and marketing systems often put small producers at a disadvantage, giving priority to market logic over the fundamental human right to food. We must change our approach to solving this problem. Current food aid initiatives are mostly focused on emergency measures rather than self-sufficiency. This approach turned out to be insufficient and ineffective. It is necessary to move from a charitable approach to human rights, one based on Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. None of these constitutions of the member states of the Council of Europe recognize the right to food as autonomous. We have to fix this. I call on all the states to enshrine the right to food in their constitutions, adopt framework laws consistent with this right, and ensure that our food security systems are based on respect for human rights. In addition, we should reintegrate that issue into the priorities of the Council of Europe in cooperation with other international organizations, in particular with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and also expand attention to the right of access to drinking water. Access to food is a foundation of peace, security and prosperity around the world. Let's join forces to ensure this right for every person on our planet.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Now it's the turn of Meryem Göker from Turkey.
President and colleagues, at this time I will speak German. Sehr verehrter Herr
President, colleagues, ensuring healthy and sustainable nutrition is not a privilege. It's a fundamental human right, which is enshrined in international law and which is essential to global peace. Yet, millions of people worldwide continue to suffer from hunger, malnutrition, and food insecurity every day. This global problem requires collective action on our parts. As many of you know, the war in Ukraine has severely disrupted global grain supplies. And this, in turn, is, of course, having a negative impact on vulnerable populations. The historic grain agreement brokered by Turkey and the United Nations has saved billions of people from famine and alleviated global food inflation. However, we cannot talk about global food security without addressing the disastrous situation in Gaza. This crisis is not a natural disaster, but it's a man-made crisis that is the result of a deliberate blockade that has brought the population of Gaza to the brink of famine. Turkey is playing a leading role in the humanitarian efforts in Gaza, providing relief supplies and food and medical care. Colleagues, in 2018, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 2417, banning the use of starvation as a weapon of war. But isn't that exactly what is happening in Gaza today? Israel has deliberately and systematically deprived the civilian population in all parts of the Gaza Strip of the essentials for survival by cutting off water and electricity, by obstructing humanitarian aid, and by attacking hospitals and schools in violation of international law. Israel's ultra-right extremist government wants to punish the civilian population in the Gaza Strip collectively and has used hunger as a method of warfare. This is a clear violation of international humanitarian law and a direct assault on human dignity. And then to have the audacity to present Israel as the only democracy in the region is truly the height of hypocrisy. If we do not act in Gaza, what does that say about our commitment to human dignity and international law? Israel must end the occupation of Palestinian territories. Netanyahu has a carte blanche to act as he pleases in Gaza, and is now extending his genocide policy to the entire region. A ceasefire is not a gesture as such, it's a necessity for the survival of innocent people. As I speak to you now, families are being torn apart, children are losing their future, and hope is fading. We must act now, because by remaining silent in the face of genocide in Gaza, we are all complicit. There must be an immediate ceasefire now, and humanitarian aid must be allowed into the Gaza Strip now. Because never again is now. Thank you.
Je donne maintenant la parole.
I now call Jeremy Corbyn from the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. I compliment Ms. Goka on her excellent speech that we've just heard, and I welcome this report that we're discussing today. It quite rightly opens with the paradox that in a continent of relative plenty, there are people living in desperate poverty and relying on food banks in order just to survive week in, week out. In my own constituency of Islington North in London, 15 years ago, food banks were unheard of. We now have, I think, 15 food banks across the constituency where families go every week to try to get enough food just to feed their children to survive, because the cost of living is so high and the levels of poverty are so desperate. And this is repeated all across Europe, with the growth of food banks and very good, well-meaning people working very hard to deliver food. My good friend Ian Byrne, the MP for Liverpool West Derby in Britain, has developed a huge Right to Food campaign across the country, and with football supporters from both of the major teams in Liverpool, given an awful lot of food, which helps to feed many children. But the whole issue is really this. We live in a wealthy society. We live in a world that produces quite sufficient food for everyone to eat, but it is not available and not distributed properly. And as paragraph 12 points out, there is no automatic right to food within our constitutional arrangements within each of our member states. And so our report really goes to the heart of all this, and I welcome what's been said. It also refers to agricultural systems, and this is actually very important. Because if you think about the whole supply chain of food, those that actually grow the food, both in Europe and around the world, are often grotesquely exploited and underpaid. The farmers are not wealthy out of food production. Those that move the food from the point of growth to the processing centres are not well paid. Those that transport it, if necessary, by ship are not well paid. The supermarket chains and the big producers make a huge amount of money, and then some of the most exploited people in the world, the Deliveroo riders and Uber Eats and all the others, the gig economy that actually bring the food to our homes, they too are grotesquely exploited. We need to look at all this, and we need to look at the quality of food that we're eating and the quality of the water that we're drinking that goes with it. Because too many people are suffering obesity and malnutrition because of poor quality food. Too many people are going hungry in this world, and we have to do something about it, which means less waste, less over-packaging, less over-purification of food, which in turn often leads to very serious health issues. This debate today goes fundamentally to the heart of what we should be about as a Council of Europe, persuading our governments to make food priority, quality food priority, something that is real to the people of the whole of this continent.
Merci, Mr. Corbyn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Corbyn. And I now call Ms. Ana Elizabeth Ayala Leyva from Mexico.
Il faut mettre la carte et puis presser sur un bouton.
You need to put the card in and then press the button.
No. Buenas tardes. Nos reunimos.
Good afternoon. We are meeting today to discuss an essential issue for the well-being of all of us. We're talking about the right to food. The report that has been tabled by Simon sheds light on a worrying development. Despite the fact that we have an abundance of food in Europe, we still have malnutrition and we have hunger. This is a contradiction, a paradox that reflects the profound difficulties in our food systems, the inconsistencies, and also our public policies. To what extent are they able to provide fair distribution of adequate food to all? The right to food is something that is enshrined in Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights. And that covenant is a covenant that all of the member states of the Council of Europe have ratified. Access to food, and the acknowledgement thereof, means that member states are duty-bound to provide food to all of their citizens. All of them should have access to adequate food. However, the figures show that the problem is still ongoing. Instead of dealing with hunger as if it were an emergency, we all really should be looking at sustainable policies that guarantee access to food. In Mexico, the human right to food is recognized in Article 4 of the Political Constitution of the United Mexican States. It is enshrined in our Constitution. That is clearly a great step forward and helps us protect that right. It means that we explicitly guarantee the right to sufficient food, quality food, and good food. We're talking here about also the text of the United Nations, which enshrine equal rights for all. And that doesn't just mean avoiding hunger. No, it is a right that actually means guaranteeing availability and accessibility and sustainability, as well as sufficient food for all. Therefore, states all have a responsibility to ensure that food is available to all, not just as a basic minimum, but also economically speaking. It should be affordable. In other words, all individuals should be able to meet their food needs without having to sacrifice other basic needs such as health and education. We cannot allow for this situation to continue, a situation of such deep inequality when it comes to access to food. And specifically, bearing in mind that the resources are there. We have the resources in order to guarantee adequate food for all. It is our responsibility as representatives of our peoples to promote a system, a food system that guarantees food for all, guaranteeing human rights and putting them center stage in our public policies. And therefore, without the shadow of a doubt, I would like to support the motion that has been tabled by the rapporteur. All of these rights for all of these people. Thank you.
Madame.
Thank you very much. And now, Jamila Madeira from Portugal.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to thank the rapporteur for such a relevant report. Defending democracy is first and after all defending human rights. And when defending democracy, we are properly fighting populism, extreme right, and obviously the respect for human rights. And we refer in the way we refer to this in this report to the goal of guaranteeing the human right to food, we know it stands side by side with other constitutional rights, and sometimes we say it that they may run against each other. We, representing citizens, cannot fail to defend this right. And in line with this report, we have to demand our member states to include this right, the right to food, in their constitutional provisions, including the right of access to drinking water, and like it was said previously, the right of quality food. This is the only way that may oblige governments to interpret rules and regulations in accordance with the protection of people's rights. Food policies must be regulated and then just more regulated than just another area of pure competition or profit. We must give priority to a coherent legal framework to make food distribution, processing, and marketing systems fairer and more stable. balanced information, regulatory terms, reducing economic imbalance between public and private players, small and bigger players, aligning with fair instruments, agriculture issues with objectives of regenerative and ecological transition. We must ensure to all small farmers in this transition an inclusive way while ensuring fair remuneration and greater protection of their rights. Our countries must adopt a legal framework that explicitly guarantees the right to food, recognizing it as a human right rather than a market commodity. This requires shifting, including our regulations in Europe, from a market-oriented perspective to a rights-oriented approach, ensuring that policies put people and their right to food at the center, acknowledging food security, like it was said today, but also food justice has fundamental to human dignity as essential. For that, special attention should be given to vulnerable populations, as low-income families, people with disabilities, migrant workers, and smallholder farmers. Policies should ensure their right to food is protected by making food affordable, accessible, and of adequate quality. The United Nations set the target to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. We cannot fail.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam. Now, Mr. Ioannis Oikonomou from Greece.
I will speak in Greek. Κυρίες και κύριοι, στη δεκαετία που διανύουμε η Ευρώπη μετά...
Ladies and gentlemen, in this decade, after a lengthy period of relative peace, Europe has come to the realization that security issues long underestimated by the EU and NATO must now be addressed with renewed urgency. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the climate crisis have prompted European countries to prioritize the energy transition. Beyond its environmental goals, this transition holds a strategic objective. Europe should not be dependent on other forces, including with regard to food security. Now, for quite some time, we've been hearing that Europe must invest resources, including in the defense industry, and I'd like to commend this initiative. I'd emphasize, however, another crucial but often neglected aspect of European security. When we talk about food security and the availability of food over the past decades, the EU mistakenly assumed that there's no issue with regard to water scarcity, and that the supply of cheap, abundant, and high-quality food could be guaranteed through imports from the developing world, and all within the context of a globalized society. But this liberal utopia no longer exists. History has proven otherwise. Europe must now urgently invest in modernizing agriculture to conserve water and to save water, and to also save with agricultural production. Traditional agriculture is something that requires considerable quantities of water. Now, we calculate that the agriculture consumes over 60% of Europe's total water usage. We therefore need to develop new technological methods to guarantee Europe's food security and sufficient access to water. I'm optimistic about us achieving this goal, as Europe boasts some of the world's most advanced agricultural technology. One example is countries such as the Netherlands. It is possible for us to invest in new forms of farming. By the expansion of greenhouse farming, for instance, is an essential step in this process. Now, the solution is not to limit consumption as such, or to develop food banks or soup kitchens. The true solution lies in increasing production and we need to support farmers. We need to produce more, and for farmers to remain within our countries. Now, this is a key food security policy that we have to promote, and we need to develop the relevant policies for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, call Mr. Emery from Turkey.
And first of all, I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to Simon for this report and his invaluable contributions to the Assembly. He has shown remarkable sensitivity in response to the devastating earthquake that struck my country, Turkey, last year, conducting thorough investigations in the affected areas and demonstrating significant solidarity with those impacted. We owe him our heartfelt thanks. The issue of the right to food addressed in this report adds a crucial dimension to our understanding of human rights. We know that the concept of human rights is dynamic and has evolved significantly over time. Since the French Revolution, there have been important developments regarding human rights and the role of states in guaranteeing these rights. Our continent has experienced major wars and human rights violations. In this regard, the Council of Europe has played a pivotal role in establishing a foundation for human rights and creating a system of guarantees based on agreements. Revising human rights to include guarantee of the right to food and access to clean water represents a significant step forward. I want to emphasize that this would be an essential starting point towards building a society that leaves no one behind and embraces all. On the other hand, we must deeply reflect on a significant issue. We cannot view human rights as rights exclusive to Europeans. Advocating human rights does not merely entail defending one's own rights, nor does it solely pertain to the rights of those we perceive as close, such as family members or friends. Advocating for human rights means defending the rights of individuals you may have never met and whose faces you have never seen, simply because they are human. Therefore, we must remain mindful of the universal nature of human rights. This universality of human rights reminds us that the right to food applies to everyone on this planet, imposing a significant responsibility on all countries, especially developed ones. Protecting natural resources, particularly water sources and agricultural lands, is crucial. Additionally, supporting the global population engaged in agriculture is vital for sustainability. So, the principle of the universality of human rights is significant concerning the right to food, and it should be further elaborated within a global guarantee system. In conclusion, Simon's efforts are immensely valuable. I wholeheartedly congratulate him and all those who contributed to this report. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you very much. I call next Mrs. Petra Bayer, Austria.
Thank you very much indeed. Warmest thanks to Simon, first of all, and then obviously to Aurora as well for presenting the report, and then, of course, to all the young activists for their impressive role in the project. I want to talk about free school meals from small farmers. Nothing exotic, but I think it truly would be a win-win approach, both for food systems transformations as well as sustainable food. We're well aware of the fact that child poverty is on the rise in Europe. Almost 1 child in 4 is threatened with poverty or social exclusion, and 21 or 20 million children were affected by a lack of food. They did less well at school, they had all kinds of health issues, and obviously there are fears that that will have a knock-on effect in later life. It might be more difficult for them to get good jobs or to be well paid. Free school meals, therefore, might be a strategic lever for implementing the right to food and nutrition to make sure that all children have daily access to healthy and nutritious food, and free school meals at the same time can help us on our way in the transition to sustainable food systems. If food is sourced from small farmers who are engaged in organic production methods, and if the food for school meals is on top of that sourced from small and medium-sized farmers in the region, once again, that is an important contribution to social justice, because farmers will then have a reliable source of income, and they will then be able to continue farming the land in our regions. So I want to encapsulate all of this in the form of 5 recommendations. First of all, the member states should make free school meals available to all school pupils, and certainly the European Social Fund and the Fund for Regional Development at EU level should make sure that they are in step with the regional development funds, and funds be used for that purpose. And thirdly, all of our local and regional authorities should make sure that they have public procurement processes for food, and make sure that our small farmers have easy access to these markets and can offer then competitive prices, and make sure that member states provide free access to school meals, that is checked, and make sure that the proper criteria are respected when it comes to invitations to tender or public procurement. And fifthly, it's important that we have a balance between North and South, and that we give an opportunity to small farmers in the global South as well. All of that is very important. Thank you very much.
Merci. La parole est...
Thank you. I call next Mrs. Seda Gören Bülük from Turkey. Thank you very much, President. Dear colleagues, everyone has a right to adequate food and culturally appropriate food, which is necessary for a healthy life. I commend Mr. Mutkan on his important work. As the report says, food insecurity is exacerbated by climate change and by the crises unfolding in Europe and in neighbouring countries. The planet is undergoing a triple crisis, and this makes sustainable farming more necessary than ever. One of the most innovative ways of producing food sustainably is vertical farming, a form of urban farming which maximises space efficiency, reduces our reliance on water by 90%, reduces transport costs, and also reduces emissions. A project of this type is actually underway right now in my constituency in Istanbul, where the public and private sector are working together for a project on vertical farming since 2022. It is a vertical farming project indoors, and it starts from the first floor, goes down 30 metres, making it the second deepest in the world. Another cause behind food insecurity is the precarious situation when it comes to crisis zones. Look at the situation in Gaza, which is more desperate as each day goes by. Agriculture used to be a source of revenue, of subsistence, but it has been paralysed because of restrictions on water, on land, and on farming equipment. UN experts have declared that hunger is now spreading throughout the whole Gaza Strip. The Israeli government has actually used hunger as a weapon of war, and half of the Palestinians within the enclave are now suffering from hunger. Doctors, families in Gaza have spoken about children, pregnant women, breastfeeding mothers who are all suffering from chronic malnutrition and dehydration, and the hospitals are ill-equipped to deal with them. This conflict is still unfolding, and humanitarian needs when it comes to food are a matter of urgency, but it's more and more difficult to get food aid to Gaza. In addition to that, this crisis is supported by part of the West, and Israel is now not just targeting Gaza, but also the West Bank and Lebanon, 2 countries that will no doubt soon be facing food insecurity as well. By way of a conclusion, I just wanted to say that I support any effort that allows us to produce food sustainably and fairly in Europe. And I think it's very important also for us to face up to the crisis that has been caused by the Israeli military attacks on Gaza. Israel must put an end to this senseless war, must put an end to this suffering, and must allow food aid to enter Gaza without any hindrance. Thank you for your kind attention.
Merci, Madame. La parole est maintenant à Madame.
Thank you, Madam. And I give the floor to Ms. Gökçe Gökçen from Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank dear Simon for his excellent work. The silence of the European constitutions on right to food, while being indirectly protected in the case law of the European Court of Human Rights and the conclusions of the European Committee of Social Rights, tells us about a political choice. As guaranteed in the International Covenant on Social, Economic and Cultural Rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the right to food is a fundamental right. The right to food encompasses not only the absence of hunger, but also access to healthy and adequate nutrition. Our current system imposes an understanding on us. Freedom of expression, democracy, the right to property, and all liberal rights are indeed rights worthy of protection. These are also shared values of our Council of Europe. However, social and economic rights, beyond being subject to political choices, are also rights that deserve the same protection. When we exclude social and economic rights, no liberal right can be fully protected. If we do not guarantee the right to health and the right to food, this also affects the assurance of right to life. If we leave the right to housing to political choices, this situation impacts the right to health. If we do not guarantee the right to unionize, this affects the freedom of assembly and freedom of expression. Therefore, social and economic rights, including the right to food, cannot be separated from first generation of rights. They are interconnected. They are indivisible. And if we want to uphold human dignity, we cannot have the option to choose certain rights while leaving others to political preference. Before I conclude my speech, I would like to briefly touch on a topic. The right to food is not only an issue for Europe and European constitutions. We also need to address the significant food crisis occurring today. Because we do not have the option to prioritize one right over another, nor can we say that we will defend rights in this geography alone. Today in Gaza, according to the Global Report on Food Crisis, we are experiencing the most serious food crisis in the history of this report. 2.2 million people face high levels of acute food insecurity, with 576,000 people in situation of catastrophe level by the GRFC. While the humanitarian aid is being blocked, as politicians and those working under the Council of Europe in this very institution, we have a responsibility. The world is watching us, and it will continue to do so. We must not forget this historic duty. Thank you.
Merci, Madame. Et la dernière...
Thank you. The last speaker is Ms. Zeynep Yildiz from Turkey.
Push the button. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, firstly, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Mr. Mutken for highlighting such an important issue through his report, and also his stance right next to the Palestine during his membership of PACE. The classification of positive and negative rights provides a normative framework to determine the moral obligations of the societies and governments regarding the right to food. Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights asserts everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Life is the foundational condition for exercising all other rights, especially establishing the right to live as a paramount. Survival transcends mere physical safety. It fundamentally involves access to food and water. An old Turkish proverb states, "Let the human life so the state can live." Thus, ensuring the survival of people is essential for preserving our institutions' sustainability. For these reasons, the right to food should be recognized as a fundamental human right in all relevant documents. As of 2023, approximately 250 million people globally face inadequate access to food, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, due to factors like climate change, internal and external conflicts, lack of plant agriculture, and economic difficulties. Simultaneously, about 1.3 billion tons of food are wasted each year, highlighting the stark inequities in food access. Economic and political instability alongside ongoing wars has severely impacted the implementation of the right to food, contributing to a global food crisis. This crisis often leads to migration, with displacement closely tied to starvation and malnutrition. Right to food is enshrined in the United Nations International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, where it holds a unique position as a fundamental means to dignified life. This covenant, signed by 171 state parties, has seen inadequate implementation in recent years. Despite Israel's approval in 1999, it voted against the UN Committee's draft recognition food as a human right in 2021, raising questions about its commitment to human rights. The situation in Gaza exemplifies this reality, where the current starvation campaign of Israeli government has left many in dire conditions and used as a weapon. We must all acknowledge that this is not an obstacle arising from indirect factors such as climate change, but rather a direct impediment created by Israel through the violation of relevant United Nations resolutions. Palestinians displaced to the south of Gaza are struggling to survive in difficult conditions, facing extreme challenges due to famine and soaring prices. 1 carton of milk exceeding $24 and diaper and nearly $14. UNICEF reported that 9 out of 10 children in Gaza suffer from severe food shortages, with malnutrition heightening mortality risks. I firmly believe that the food crisis in Gaza and inequities in access to food must remain a priority on the Assembly's agenda, ensuring that Palestinians can enjoy their right to food. Thank you.
Voilà, la liste des oreilles.
Thank you. That brings the list of speakers to an end. I call the rapporteur to take the floor. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Simon Moukien once again for his excellent work on the human right to food, a topic that both the SOC committee and myself, I fully support and consider of utmost importance. I'd also like to thank once again the group of young people now sitting in the gallery. Thank you again for the great smoothie distribution with your mobile kitchen. Maybe we can applaud them. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your energy and engagement and for your precious points of view on food resilience. I firmly believe that the time has come to involve young people in decisional processes that concern their lives more actively. This report is an example of this approach. I'd also like to thank you, dear colleagues, for your valuable insight on this topic. As you emphasize, the right to food is indeed fundamental, and it is our duty to reaffirm the role the Council of Europe can play by developing a robust framework to support this right. I'd like to emphasize once again how crucial it is to protect the general population and vulnerable groups from hunger and food shortages, while ensuring the accessibility and sustainability of food, including access to clean and safe drinking water. Europe continues to face deep inequalities in access to healthy and sufficient food. Food security is severely impacted by armed conflict, as we see in Ukraine, often called the granary of Europe, which is suffering due to the Russian aggression. Additionally, we are grappling with the devastating effects of climate change, which has brought entire regions and countries in Europe to their knees in terms of food supply, leading to price increases. These issues carry enormous economic, social, and environmental consequences. The agricultural crisis is being worsened by the severe impacts of climate change. I must mention the devastating droughts in southern Italy and Spain, as well as the recent floods in northern Italy and parts of Eastern Europe. Additionally, I cannot overlook the issues caused by PFAS contaminated groundwater, which leads to serious health problems such as cancer. Moreover, we must continue our efforts to promote a circular economy to combat food waste and reduce CO2 emissions. This is not only an environmental challenge, but an ethical one as well. The right to food is closely interconnected with the right to a healthy environment and should therefore be included in the Council of Europe's strategy. To conclude, immediate action is needed to address these significant challenges. Thank you.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much. If she wishes to take the floor, I give the floor to the Vice Chairperson of the Committee, Ms. Danuta Jazlowiecka. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, the report results from a paradox. Despite of abundance of food, hunger and malnutrition occurring in Europe, with revealing stark inequities in access to healthy food, inequalities further reinforced by climate change. Current system prioritizing market interest over the human rights to food, leaving small producers at disadvantage. The report calls on policymakers to highlight the rights-based approach rooted in Article 11 of the resolution adopted by International Covenant of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights in 1966. Let me remind you the main goal: everyone to be free from hunger. It highlights the absence of constitutional recognition of the right to food across Council of Europe member states and urges parliamentarians to enshrine this right in national constitutions. It also calls on the Council of Europe to make food and water access a political priority, working closely with international bodies like FAO to address these preceding issues. I wish to thank the reporter Simon Mutko, who is in the hemicycle today together with the young ambassadors for food resilience in gallery. Again, we welcome you for the tremendous work he has done, and all those who have participated in this debate today. Especially thank you for this initiative of very, very important issue. I trust we can endorse the text put forward for adoption and send a strong signal to our member states. Simon, thank you for your great job in Assembly. As Edith told, we miss you, especially this week, and especially me was missing you, and our colleagues from the committee, they can tell you why. So thank you, Andora Floridia, to accepting responsibility for the report and bringing this very important report to ensuring acceptance by Assembly. Thank you very much. I'm glad that the report has attracted so much interest, as evidenced by today's debate. So, as far as I know, we will continue this subject in close future. Thank you.
Merci pour cette déclaration.
Thank you for that declaration of friendship and recognition. The debate is closed. The Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development has presented a draft resolution, document 16041, to which 11 amendments have been tabled, and also a draft recommendation to which 2 amendments have been tabled. The amendments are included in the compendium that's been made available online. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. We'll start off with the draft resolution, and I have been informed that the Chair of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development wishes to propose the amendment to consider amendments 5, 7, 8 and 3, which were rejected with a 2/3 majority in committee, that they be declared as rejected by the Assembly. Is that the case, Madam Vice Chairperson?
Yes, this is the case.
Alors, si personne ne s'y
So if there are no objections, we will consider those amendments as definitively rejected. If there is an objection, we will have to ensure that such a motion has the support of 10 people. Are there any objections in the room to such a procedure? I see no objection. So amendments 5, 7, 8 and 3 to the draft resolution are therefore rejected and will not be put to the vote. We will now turn to examine the other amendments, which will be discussed according to the usual procedure. Moving then to Amendment 6 and Sub-Amendment 1. Amendment number 6 is the subject of a sub-amendment moved by the committee. I give the floor to Ms. Olena Komenko to support Amendment 6. You have 30 seconds.
Dear colleagues, this amendment just adds the reason why there can be disruptions in food supply, and it can be caused by geopolitical tensions that disrupt traditional supply chains. So this is obvious, and this is what we have heard today from the speakers.
Merci. Nous en venons.
Thank you. That brings us on to the sub-amendment, and I give the floor to the rapporteur to move the sub-amendment on behalf of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development. The rapporteur.
Pour le sous-amendement numéro 1 à la...
So that is sub-amendment 1 to amendment 6.
It's okay.
Il est défendu. Avis de l'autre.
It has its support. The opinion of the mover of the amendment on the sub-amendment, Ms. Komenko. Are you in favour or not of the sub-amendment?
Mr. President, I am in favour of sub-amendment.
La Commission est naturellement favorable.
The committee obviously being in favour, we will now proceed to vote on the sub-amendment. The vote is open.
Le scrutin est clos.
The vote is closed. Sub-amendment 1 is agreed to. We now come to the main amendment. Does anybody wish to speak against Amendment 6 as sub-amended? That is not the case. The opinion of the committee on the amendment as sub-amended.
6 was rejected by 2/3 majority.
Je crois pas.
I do not believe that that is the case.
This. Okay, sorry. Sub-amendment 1 to the amendment 6, the committee was in favor in this sub-amendment and adopted unanimously the amendment as sub-amended.
Très bien. Nous allons donc...
Thank you. So the committee is in favor of the amendment as sub-amendment. We will now proceed to vote on Amendment 6 as sub-amended. The vote is open.
Le scrutin est clos. Je demande la...
The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 6, as sub-amendment, is agreed to. We will skip Amendment 7. That was rejected with a 2/3 majority. And we come to an oral amendment moved by way of a compromise. Mr. Goncharenko, you wish to withdraw Amendments 1 and 2 in favour of an oral amendment of conciliation. Is that so? Do you withdraw Amendments 1 and 2 in favour of this oral amendment by way of a compromise?
Can I speak in name of Goncharenko and also also of amendment? I agree to oral sub-amendment, but what I wanted to say that in our committee, we today voted for this amendment, but with 2 additional sentences. The Assembly will continue to closely monitor the grave unprecedented situation. It's about the food security, and the Assembly will prepare a separate report on the issue of food security, as it was actually not covered by this report. But somehow these 2 sentences now not in this amendment. They say it's because this against the rules, but refer to the rules that are talking about the motion and not about the amendment. So of course I agree, I don't want to make a mess here, but I think this is a tricky thing that was done just to, and this was the proposition of the our reporter, but I don't know why these 2 sentences are not here. Thank you. I agree, Mr. President.
Voilà, le deal qui m'a été proposé.
I think the deal as put to me was that Mr. Goncharenko wished to withdraw Amendments 1 and 2 in favour of an oral amendment by way of a compromise. So, with your permission, I will read the text of the oral amendment. In the draft resolution, after paragraph 3, insert the following paragraph. The Assembly is fully aware of the particular challenges Europe faces due to the war in Ukraine. According to Ukrainian authorities, between 15% and 18% of Ukrainian agricultural land is currently under temporary occupation, while the lands of many Ukrainian farmers are now either occupied or destroyed. Ukrainian agriculture, which before the invasion accounted for 10% of global wheat and barley exports, 15% of corn exports, and 50% of sunflower oil exports, has been severely affected by bombings, landmines, and land contamination. So if now you agree to withdraw Amendments 1 and 2, we can then vote on the text that I've just read out. If that's not the case, we will then take those 2 amendments, 1 and 2. You have the floor.
Yes, I agree, and I withdraw and agree on this. But again, I want to say that 2 sentences were missing that we voted. That the Assembly will come to a separate report. And I hope, because this report was not covering the food security, I hope we will keep to our promise and still will have a separate report on this issue on food security, not only on right to food. Thank you.
Voilà, donc les amendements 1 et 2.
That means then Amendments 1 and 2 were withdrawn. I have read out the oral amendment put forward by way of a compromise. Does anybody wish me to read it once again? It seems to me fairly clear. So under Rule 34(7)(a) of the Rules of Procedure, the President can exceptionally declare an oral amendment or an oral sub-amendment acceptable if it's destined to promote clarity, accuracy, or conciliation. I consider the oral amendment as acceptable and it meets the criteria of our rules, but it can be challenged if 10 members wish to object and stand in order to express their objection. Does anybody object to us examining this oral amendment? That doesn't seem to be the case. I give the floor to the rapporteur to support the oral amendment.
We agree with the sub-amendment, and we are in favor.
Quelqu'un demande-t-il la parole?
Does anybody wish to speak against the oral amendment? That is not the case. The committee is, of course, in favor. Is that right? We will therefore proceed to vote on the oral amendment. And we will not be examining amendments 1 and 2. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The oral amendment is agreed. We will skip amendments 1 and 2, 8 also. That brings us on to amendment 9 and sub-amendment. Amendment number 9 is the subject of a sub-amendment moved by the committee. I give the floor to Olena Komenko to support amendment 9. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. In this amendment, we would like national and we would like that food security could be the key component, as a central component of national and international strategies. These strategies should include the creation of strategic food reserves, strengthening of supply chains, and support for local food production systems to mitigate the impact of global disruptions. So this is about reserves. We need to have reserves.
Merci.
Thank you very much. And now I'm going to move on to the sub-amendment. I call the rapporteur to support this on behalf of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development.
C'est le sous-amendement.
This is the sub-amendment to amendment number 9.
The committee was in favor in this sub-amendment and approved unanimously the amendment as a sub-amended.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak against the sub-amendment? What is the opinion of the mover of the amendment regarding this sub-amendment? Mrs. Komenko.
Support sub-amendment.
Merci.
Thank you. The committee is clearly in favour, is that right? Very well. In that case, we move on to the vote on the sub-amendment. The vote is open.
Le scrutin est clos.
The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Sub-amendment is adopted. That brings us on to the amendment. Would anybody like to speak against amendment number 9 as sub-amended just now? I see no one. The opinion of the committee on the amendment as sub-amended?
Favor.
Donc nous allons...
Thank you. In that case, we move on to the vote. Amendment 9 as sub-amended. The vote is open.
Le scrutin est clos. Je demande...
The vote is closed and I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment number 9 as sub-amended is carried. Let us move on to, well, not Amendment 3 because that was rejected by a 2/3 majority. Amendment 4 instead. I call Mr. Goncharenko to support Amendment 4 or someone in his place perhaps. That's to support Amendment number 4.
S'il n'est pas soutenu, il n'est pas mis au vote. Non? Non, alors, s'il n'est pas soutenu, il n'est pas mis au vote.
Personne ne le soutient?
Nobody here to support it? Amendment 4?
Voilà, il n'est pas soutenu.
It is not supported, and under those circumstances, it is discarded. Amendment number 10, sub-amendment number 1 as well. So amendment number 10 has been sub-amended by the committee, and I call Mrs. Komenko to support amendment number 10 first.
This amendment speaks by itself, Mr. President. We call on member states to invest in technological innovations and modern agricultural practices that enhance food production and supply chain efficiency that are crucial for building resilient food systems capable of addressing global and food security challenges. So this is about innovations. Thank you.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam. There is a sub-amendment to this. I call the rapporteur to support this on behalf of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development.
Yes, I'm in favor.
Voilà, le sous-amendement.
Thank you. So the sub-amendment is not only proposed but supported. Would anybody like to speak against the sub-amendment? That appears not to be the case. What about the opinion of the mover? How do you stand on the sub-amendment, Mrs. Komenko?
Do you support the sub-amendment?
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much. The committee is clearly in favour, is that right? Yes. So the committee is in favour, in which case we can move on to the vote on the sub-amendment, and the vote is open.
Le scrutin est clos.
And the vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The sub-amendment is approved, which brings us back to the amendment. Does anybody wish to speak against amendment number 10 as sub-amended? I see no one. The opinion of the committee, please, on the amendment as sub-amended?
Are in favor.
En faveur.
You're in favour. Excellent. Let us move on then to the vote. Amendment 10 as sub-amended. The vote is open.
Le scrutin est clos.
And the vote is closed, and I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment number 10 as sub-amended is carried. That brings us on to amendment number 11. And I call the mover, Mrs. Komenko, to support amendment number 11.
This amendment was rejected by the committee, and we have submitted the request to the table office to withdraw this amendment. I would like to withdraw this amendment. Thank you.
L'amendement est retiré.
Thank you. So the amendment is withdrawn. Thank you. We can vote then on the draft resolution. We need a simple majority for this. We will proceed to the vote on the draft resolution, which you'll find in document 16041 as amended. A simple majority is required, and the vote is open.
Le scrutin est clos.
The vote is closed, and I call for the result to be displayed. The draft resolution in document 16041 as amended is approved.
Nous en venons à...
That brings us on to the draft recommendation. I would like to remind you that 2 amendments have been tabled to the draft recommendation. I've been told by the chair of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development that they would like to ask the Assembly to look at the 2 amendments which were rejected by the committee by a 2/3 majority as being rejected by the plenary as a whole. Is that right, Madam Chair?
C'est bien le cas.
That appears to be the case. Thank you. If there are no objections, Amendments 12 and 13 will be considered as rejected definitively. If, however, there is an objection to this, we need to check whether there are 10 members in support of objecting to that. Are there any objections? That appears not to be the case. I see no objections, which means that Amendment 12 and 13 to the draft recommendation are rejected and will not be called. That brings us on to the vote on the draft recommendation itself. I see that there is a request for the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like kindly ask you to accept 2 small oral amendments on the draft recommendation. It's just an editorial precision in the paragraph 5 to add the word peasants to the word farmers, the rights of peasants and farmers, because the original text just mentioned the group of farmers, not the peasants, just not the small land farming. And the other one was in paragraph 6 to add the term Panther principles. I would kindly ask you to accept it, please.
Alors, merci pour ces propos.
Thank you very much for those proposals. I have great experts by my side, and they tell me that unfortunately that is not admissible at this juncture, at this stage in the procedure. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Being a member of parliament is sometimes really tough. And civil servants clearly, rule. So sorry. Therefore, let us vote on the draft recommendation. You'll find the text in document 16041. I remind you that a 2/3 majority is required for this, and the vote is open.
Le scrutin est clos.
And the vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft recommendation, to be found in document 16041, is approved. Unanimously, in fact. Congratulations.
La prochaine séance.
The Assembly will hold its next public sitting tomorrow at 10 a.m. With the agenda approved on Monday, the sitting is adjourned. Thank you.